The following show is pre-recorded, so we won't be able to take your great calls.
I'm Ed Setzer, the Dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And again, for your purposes, this and every Saturday, I get the privilege of being your host. And I really love it. I hope you can tell that I love it and really enjoy having our guests on as well. So today's guest is going to be talking about the issue of manhood, which is an interesting conversation because it's sort of a, I don't know how to describe this. There's a lot of questions about what manhood is and why it matters. And I just yesterday did a little pop-up event in Boise, Idaho, and we're launching a campus there and or a seminary site there. When I was there, we talked about this, and because there's a crisis in manhood in our country today. I might even say our world, not all the world, but a lot of the Western world. There's something of a crisis of manhood, and I think there's more to come. I mean, there's more challenges and struggles to come in and around this issue. And I think we see this expressed in the lives of a lot of young men today who are often, the term I used yesterday is they're unmoored. You know, a ship is moored to the harbor, and young men are unmoored because in some ways they have real questions about their future, particularly non-college educated young men. And I'm of the view it's only going to get worse. And part of the reason is I think it's only going to get worse, and this is the example I shared yesterday, part of the reason is, Elon Musk. And let me explain, because a lot of young men, I think, look up to Elon Musk. He's a brilliant, and he's got all kinds of personal things that are not where we would be honoring the Lord. But the point is, brilliant engineer, creator, but he's working on something every single day with all of his energy that will be one of the biggest disruptions to young men in a generation. And that is the self-driving car. Really, the self-driving truck. Because 3 million truckers in our country. It's the number one job for non-college educated young men. And there are 3 million truckers in our country, overwhelmingly men, mostly, not all, but a lot of young men, who, when that's perfected, which could be, you could get an announcement tomorrow, you're going to see vast unemployment, and with the rise of automation and robotics. If you had heard me talk about this like 10 years ago, robotics are going to change everything. And I think we're all kind of realize that right now, people coming into the job market, AI is impacting this, and a lot of young men are being impacted. So when young men are unmoored, the world's not working for them. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm the father of 3 daughters. So I know it's hard to be a young woman in this day and age and a voice for my daughters and other women. But young men, there's a crisis in young men. And some of them are turning to Jesus Christ. So I actually wrote an article in USA Today last week and got some brand new data. And my producer Karen's put this in the show notes over at edstetzerlive.com. And if you click on it, I actually have brand new data just released that shows from the Barna Group. It's in the bottom of the first paragraph, and it shows this shift. And now young men are turning back to church. Now, don't. It's not time to call this is not a revival by any stretch of imagination. And matter of fact, one of the reasons is young women are coming fewer times, or less women are coming to church. Young women in particular. But the point is this: we're actually seeing young men respond to this as well. As a matter of fact, this weekend at our church was up in about 20% in attendance, a lot of young men there. Okay, so all that's true, but I need you to know that when we talk about young men come back to church, that's just a fraction of them. Far more of them are being influenced by what's called the manosphere. People like Andrew Tate, who's just, I will tell you, there's probably not a 20-year-old in America who doesn't know who that is, which tells you how pervasive his influence is, and it's not good. Or the influence of Joe Rogan in the manosphere. I don't put Andrew Tate and Joe Rogan in the same category at all. Or for that matter, Jordan Peterson's influence. And I don't put they're not the same, he's not in the same category as Rogan and Tate. But the point is what I want is godly young men being mentored by older men in your church. I don't want them to be discipled by their Joe Rogan podcast. I want them to be changed by the power of the gospel. I want them to be the man that they are meant to be. And that's like a long introduction. But the reason I want to say all that is our guest today is John Simons. He's the author of The Man You're Meant to Be, and he's the men's pastor of Rolling Hills Community Church, which fun fact, years ago, I tried to see, hey, do you need a teaching pastor at Rolling Hills Community Church? When I was in Nashville, he received his PhD from Southern Seminary in ethics and public policy. He's got a BA from Cal Baptist. My daughter's at Cal Baptist right now. She's just finishing up, as well as an MA. Wait for it, drum roll, an MA in philosophy and an MDiv from the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. But fun fact, John, the reason that we asked you on the program was because Karen Hendren, our amazing producer, liked your book. And so I didn't ask you on because you're a two-time graduate of Talbot, but I'm excited that you are, and thanks for joining us on the program.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Ed. Really appreciate it.
All right, so you, of course, I'm down here in Southern California. I'm teaching pastor at Mariners Church. You used to be at Saddleback, so we must have run into each other at some point. I used to preach there a few times a year. Have we met before?
I think we met maybe during in Rick's absence after his son had passed away, and I think you had filled in a number of times. And I think we ran into each other once or twice a while ago. But you know how it gets to be at a large church like that. A lot of people trying to say hi.
And now you went from California to Nashville. That's really kind of stereotypical. I just want to point out to you. So
we are living into the stereotype, but I will say it was, as someone who grew up in Southern California, it was definitely harder to leave than I ever imagined. But God has been so faithful through that journey of Him asking us to move across the country, and my family's still back in Southern California, so we still frequently desire to get out there, and so I'm sure we will meet up one of these days.
Well, let's bring you home, man. Let's bring you home. The Lord's doing great stuff out in California, and we'd love to have you back. The Lord's not doing as much in Nashville. I mean, He just got so many of His people there, so He's working special in California. But anyway, all right, that's another story for another day. Let's talk a little bit about your book, and really let's start kind of with the theme. By the way, the book, just so everyone is aware, is The Man You're Meant to Be. And if you go to edstetzerlive.com, you can link to all of John's information there, his ministry, his book, everything else. All right, so. When you think about church, the big news in religion research the last decade is that now young men are attending church at a higher level than young women, which is just a shocking shift. But in there, your book kind of builds with this theme that church is a kind of a refuge for men today, and do men need a refuge? How is church a refuge? Kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. So the subtitle of the book is a call of self-examination for every believer, hypocrite, and outsider. And one of the goals that I'm trying to speak to all three audiences in this book, in a sense that we have to believe that Psalm 46 is true, that God is our refuge, and I believe so should His house. And when we hear in the Gospels, like Matthew 9, that Jesus is coming for those who are unhealthy, those who are sick. And well, the local church ought to be a place for men who are struggling. And that's each of us. Even after we come to faith in Jesus and union with Him, and His Spirit is consistently drawing us closer to who He is, well, there are still struggles that will abound in our heart. And so how is the church then, and you've already hit on some wonderful topics that we can come back to, but given our culture today, how do we have the church be seen as a valid option for men to walk into, young men, which we're seeing? And I love that you did point out that it's not like there is young men in droves coming through your church doors every Sunday morning, but it's much more than it used to be. And in all that, as men, how can the church become a refuge, a place where we're working out our messes, our struggles, our confusion, our worldview? And then as pastors, asking and helping men to, as we meet them in their messes and their existential angst of the modern world, how can we point them to our good shepherd and our good father? And that's why a lot of the book is through that lens.
And I think it's helpful lens too, and I want to encourage people to get it. Again, it's the man you're meant to be. A call of self-examination for every believer, hypocrite, and outsider. You've been working with men for a pretty decent amount of time. Men's ministry pastor out here in Southern California, and then back now in the Nashville area. But what do you see? Kind of explain this if you could. What's the state of manhood today? Like are men kind of getting their sea legs back, or is it still? They're unsure how to be men. I mean, give me a big picture of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed. So I think there's a landscape out there that's worth charting. And in the beginning of the book, I kind of get into that. And there is, I think many men are those who are walking back through the doors of the church. There's some felt need that's pulling them through, whether
Yeah,
that's due to the toll of loneliness. I mean, I don't think we are past the epidemic of loneliness coming
right. I
out
agree.
of the pandemic. I think that's still ringing true for men, and even that, I would say the consequences from that season, the weight of habits we wish we didn't take on during the pandemic, which maybe is now the weight of an addiction, whether it's hidden or not, whether are the coping mechanisms that we found to be too comfortable, whether for some men that'll be their coming walking in saying, I know I'm just drinking too much, or I've leaned into pornography, and even my secular podcasters are saying this is unhealthy. And it turns out that I think really what men are looking for is that place to work out the mess in their life. But what they're finding is that there's the community that if you're willing to walk in the messes of life with them, that there's a community of support that I think maybe they see on somewhere like Joe Rogan when he has his buddies on and they're laughing, they're carrying on, and they're going from a humorous conversation to then something serious out of nowhere that's like, wait, let's stop and dive into that. I think in many ways, men are looking for that to meet in friendship, but then to also at the same time, there's a level of how do I actually navigate through life well? And I think that's what men are keeping on coming back to. And you've hit the so many of the cultural aspects of this, Ed. But men are absolutely, I think they're looking out at culture and saying, I need help. It's what are those sources of help? And so in the book, I call them the outsiders, that most men's formation at this point is they're finding it in these podcasts, the Joe Rogans of the world, the Jordan B. Petersons. And I would absolutely characterize someone like Albert Tate in a different category than the prior. But many men are listening to Joe Rogan and Jordan B. Peterson, some Navy SEALs, Jocko and David Goggins, and many of these men are touching on a life full of virtue. The problem is it's detached from its divine origin of how our manhood ought to be absolutely in line with what it means to conform to the image of Jesus. And so when there's a divorce or separation between its divine origin, what my biggest concern and what we're seeing is that it eventually this gospel of self-improvement or of even self-mastery in some ways, well, it will lead to an idol of the self. And that's what we're seeing. And so the problem is even in that state, you're still lonely. And so we get these men walking through the doors who, quite frankly, they know they're in need of relationship and friendship, and along with that, how as the church do we equip them to say and appoint them to the ways of Jesus by being in union with him?
Yeah, and I think there's so many questions that I have, and I know our audience will have as well. For example, we've seen some churches say we're going to be the man church, and man, we just seen it spiral out of control and blow itself up and more. And yet, how do we challenge men to more? Well, we're going to talk about that. Your calls, 877-548-3675. Talking to John Simons, the man you're meant to be. Again, our number, 877-548-3675. Okay, we're back. It's Stetzer Live. I'm Ed Stetzer. John Simons is my guest. We're talking about his book, The Man You're Meant to Be. And John, I probably ended the last segment on a bit of a down note, but I've seen two major churches blow themselves up. One of them doesn't even exist anymore because of a hyper focus on like hyper masculinity. You got to man up. You got to be a man, et cetera, et cetera. And being a man's described as, I don't know, maybe you're watching sports and riding on ATVs and cutting down trees. I don't know quite what it is. It's funny because I'm quite comfortable. I'm quite comfortable in my manhood and my masculinity as a professor and as a dean. I'm going to the Dodgers tonight. I'm going to the Dodgers to watch the Giants tonight because one of my faculty is the chaplain for the Dodgers, Brandon Cash. He's a great guy. One of the ways that our faculty do great work in the community. and he wanted me to come to a game. So I'm coming to a game, but I don't know anything about sports ball. So like, if I looked at these two churches that I watched blow up, would I like not be in that categorization? Like, how am I supposed to decide the man I'm meant to be, and how does your book help me to get there?
Yeah, Ed, and that's no, I actually do not think that's a downer point of what you said. I think the temptation that within, I mean, I grew up in understanding early 2000s, evangelical culture, and men's ministry is kind of what you just described, that it's about these aspects of these activities in some ways. And here's even the fear that I would say, even when we think we're doing men's discipleship right, we tend to believe, well, if we just get them to understand the context of Ephesians 5 of what it means to lead and love and serve in marriage like Christ loves the church, oh, well, we'll figure it out. I think what I'm trying to hit in this book is actually, we can say all the right things. We can say you should act like men. Most men don't know how to do that, even in the church, because there's a deeper level of Christ-like formation, of spiritual formation that precedes those actions that we must actually wrestle with ourselves. And so in many ways, this book is a step back even before those things, because I mean, I go to Matthew 7, 24, in the wise and foolish builders. If God calls us, we're not just called to be men, but wise men, and that we're supposed to hear his words, to practice them, to stand on his foundation. And when I love wisdom literature, and we see it all throughout, obviously, scripture, but when we see in Romans and Paul talking about, if our primary vocation is to be conformed to the image, then we have to, as men, even before we get to our actions, let's talk about our formation in our deepest longings, in our feelings, our aims, in our idea of the good life as a man. How are those aligning with Jesus? How are those aligning with the image of our call to be in the image of Jesus? And so I'm affirming absolutely all of the traditional men's verses of what are our roles within culture, within the church. But I'm trying to go back to James 3 and say, but there's a wisdom from below and a wisdom from above of what's calling on our heart. And unless we get that piece right every single day, well, we can have form a men's ministry that hey, guys are in community, that maybe they're doing all the right things, but there's so much that precedes those moments that I think runs contrary to a lot of what you've maybe seen in men's ministries before. And so that's why I think in this work, what we're really trying to do is, have we taken on some larger identity pieces as men of, who am I yearning to become in this world? Who do I want to be fully known by? Who am I inviting in? Who would I lay down my life for? And most importantly, how do I actually believe God sees me? Do I actually believe that he's a good father, that he is the good shepherd that's again meeting me in the places of my heart that, one, I've hopefully offered him, but even the parts of me that I'm inviting the Spirit to expose, because I need to, beyond anything, take on the character, posture, and presence of Jesus for my family, for my church. And so that's the heart of this book, is those pieces. And so, yeah, what you probably won't get in this book is this idea of, hey, just man up. I don't think in culture
Yeah.
right now, especially younger men, as a 35-year-old, I I didn't get there alone. I needed help with that and to be walked with through that.
Fascinating, and really important, because again, there's a crisis of young men, and I got to tell you, some of the very people who blew up their church with their hypermasculinity last time are now trying to become influencers of young men again. And I think we need
Yes.
to
Yep.
really see the fruit that's here, and where that ended up. Listen, let me invite our callers again. So maybe you've got a question. Maybe you're trying to figure out yourself, like, how would I be the kind of man that God would want me to be? The title of the book is "The Man You're Meant to Be," so it obviously fits into that. Or maybe you're raising a young son and you're trying to figure out this. I was raised by a single mom. Maybe you're like, as a single mom, how do I help my young man develop into the kind of man that God would want him to be? Whatever it may be. Maybe you got a comment about how you've seen it go well, and you've seen one generation mentor the other generation, or you've seen What does godly manhood look like, right? Lots of angles we can take. 877 548 3675. Again, that's 877. They tell me I got to say it slower. 877 548 3675. We'd love to hear your thoughts on manhood and how we're to address it well and what it looks like to live that, well, that kind of life that God intends for us to live. Let's talk a little bit about Gen Z. That's not going to be our only topic today, because I don't think either of us are Gen Z. Aren't you like, does that make you a millennial at your age?
Yeah, I'd be on the younger side of the millennials. Yeah, that's 35. I've just turned 35 last week.
Ah, I remember those days. I have shoes that are 35 now. But anyway, so and happy birthday. Well,
Yeah.
I was September 2nd, but happy birthday to you. So what day was your birthday?
September 8th. Thanks, Ed.
September 8th. September 8th is the
Yes.
birthday of Star Trek Day. It's September 8th, 1968. The first episode of Star Trek was birthed. But anyway, that's another story for another day. And by the way, even fascinating kind of portrayals of manhood there as well. But anyway, so talk to us a little bit about Gen Z, the generation below you and several generations below me. Man, what's going on with their understanding of manhood and what are the needs they have?
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think you had a lot of great content on the prior episode, and I think all of that was so true. In that, I think Gen Z is almost in I could say almost a healthy level of skepticism to um, being told what to do. I think that there's an inherent questioning and skepticism that maybe I mean, I share as more of a skeptic in most things myself. There's moments where I'm like, man, the Lord has done a really great work that I'm a pastor and shepherding a flock, and as just someone who is more skeptical of just um, how does this all how does this all work in our world? And I think Gen Z is coming with their worldview questions, whether they really know it or not. That's what they're coming in with, and they're passionate about seeking the truth. But on the other hand, I think they're also the social media generation that they see through things so quickly because they recognize the emptiness of somewhat of social media as well. So they're both the social media generation who wants attention from social media, but on the other hand, they know how empty it can be when you're sitting there just waiting for likes, and that's your sense of worth. And then they are maybe showing up in our churches, and their authenticity and vulnerability means the world to them because that's what they are looking for, and maybe they haven't recognized from social media. And that's again, it draws back to, I think, younger men. We have quite a few younger men in their 20s and young 30s. I recognize kind of share a lot of the similarities. They're looking to be able to sit with someone, another friend, who they don't have to put on this mask of I've got my entire life together. And I think that's where some of this, the younger side of what's going on in men's discipleship, is so helpful, even course correcting some of the things we see in the greater Western church. I mean, what Gen Z is asking for is meet us where we're at, but likewise bring who you really are too. And share your vulnerabilities. Share that your life is not perfect. My life is not perfect as a dad to a 6 and a 4-year-old. That, I have coaches and mentors of like, how do I parent this week? How do I parent through this? Um, and likewise in my own faith of having mentors who are willing to speak in. And that's what I think a lot of these Gen Z are looking for, is people who are willing to show that they're investing in them, that they're willing to say, whatever you say, I'm not going to turn away. And in some ways, that was my story. When my dad had moved out when I was in high school, it was my youth pastor who actually saw that, man, I don't think John's in a good place. And I was roughly going to church. Sometimes I actually grew up at Saddleback Church, but we were more of the kind of the nominal family that went on Easter and Christmas, and sometimes sprinkled in between, if sports schedule allowed it. And I think some of those core longings, though, from me growing up, is not so different than what we're seeing in Gen Z. Is they're wanting someone to sit there and say, "You matter. I value you, and I'm willing to work through whatever's going on in your life." and ask those really tough questions about themselves, but also God. And I think that's a special place that we're kind of in, Ed.
Yeah, so good, so good. Listen, I need some of you men not to be scared to call in. I want to encourage you. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts as well. Like, what are you doing? If you're a pastor, if you're a church leader, if you're a parent, what are you doing to raise up and to train and to help men thrive and flourish? We'd love to hear from you. Our phone number here is 877-548-3675. Again, that's 877-548-3675. Because I'm really of the view that there's a crisis of young men in our country. And it's also, too, I don't even think it's just young men. I mean, I think about, like when I go to my small group, it's often the men in a small group over years, not necessarily my small group right now, over years that are hardest to connect, trying to figure out this journey, et cetera, et cetera. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts. 877-548-3675. This is Ed Stetzer Live. We're talking to John Simons about his book, The Man You're Meant to Be. 877-548-3675. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer Live. I am your host. And so let's continue our conversation. We're going to take some calls. I think these are important questions that we're jumping into, and I really like it. Let's go first to Kevin in Minnesota. Kevin, you're live on the air.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was what I'm doing first off to help people is I had got into trouble. I started out as a teenager. Both of my parents were addicted to drugs and things, so I didn't have a really good upbringing, and I went left. But I knew Jesus because we prayed for him every night for dinner before my family got split up. And then fast forward, I was a 6-time felon, went to prison twice. When I got out, the second time I had went to prison actually is when the Lord got a hold of my heart. And so when I got out, I knew I wasn't going to be doing any of the crazy stuff anymore. The Lord changed me completely, and I knew I was going to work for him. So what I did was I didn't accept any money, any grants, anything like that. I started a Bible study at our a guy heard me. He was a pastor, and he heard that I was talking to people about Jesus a lot. So when the Lord put it on my heart to get a church, he was the first person I called, and lo and behold, he had 2 churches I didn't even know about. But anyways, I've been teaching there now for five years. I do Bible studies every Saturday there. And then I also go into the jails, and I teach Bible study in jail, back in the jails now. But my point was when you were talking about how do we get to the youth, we have to be more real about what's happening in our lives as pastors and preachers and teachers of the living word of God. And secondly, we have to teach the living word of God verbatim. Right now, we got a lot of feel-good messages going on in the children, and they're bringing the world into the church instead of the church going into the world.
All right, Pastor, you got to preaching on that one, and I liked it. If you will hold on for just a second, we're going to give you a copy of The Man You're Meant to Be. And let me just say, what a great story of how God worked and redemption. And John, I think this is, when we challenge men, not in the kind of silly ways we saw, like you said, in the early 2000s, but we challenge men. We call them to something different. And here in this, we just heard his story, like Kevin's story, where he was in prison, and now he's leading men and making a gospel difference. So talk to us a little bit about, do men need to be challenged? Do they rise up to the challenge? Do we challenge them in right ways? Help us think about some of those things.
Yeah, and let me just first say, brother, I'm so encouraged by your story. And that you walking through what you have is one of the reasons you're stepping in to care for men in this way and why you see it to be such value. And I think we need more stories like that. And, I talk about in the book that, I started looking at porn at 11 years old, and I felt so much shame and not being able to know how to drop that as a coping mechanism through my, even into my young adult years when I was at Cal Baptist, and I felt like such a hypocrite that, I was hiding this addiction. And obviously that addiction doesn't send you to prison. But so many men are walking through stories of what you just suggested of, like, for your case, you did, there was a time where you're incarcerated, but that time when you're incarcerated, you were met face to face with with your consequences. And I felt that weight in a different way. And so I think men are wanting to be challenged in just everything you said in a way that is actual real life matters, that I think men hold on to the feelings of shame, of toxic shame, of embarrassment. And I think that's one of the reasons why we tend to just stuff things down. And then when we get in a circle around other men, realize, oh man, you're going through that too. You've struggled with that. And that's one of the things that, for me, it's the importance of a recovery group where you can be so brutally honest, rigorous honesty with yourself and with God, that sort of challenge is what I think men need. And it's what actually, even though I like to say I white knuckled myself into some sobriety with pornography, that really wasn't what my heart needed. My heart needed to realize that I could come to my good Father, and that in my anxieties, in the reasons I was acting out, that He's meeting me there. And I think for men, that is going back to Ed, your question, no matter what a man is struggling with, I think that is why he wants to be challenged today, is he doesn't want this feel good message. He probably doesn't already feel good. So why give him this overly encouraging message? Instead, let's give him the real hope of Jesus. Absolutely. But let's recognize he's probably in the trenches. Many families feel like they're in the trenches of life right now, that they're just grinding through. And, whether it's because there's financial pressures or anything going on, there's a lot of life that's happening. So let's meet them where they're at. And so again, brother, I was just that's such an incredible story. And I'm praying for your ministry to continue on the way it is, because that's exactly what we need to keep doing, leaning in.
Love it. Kevin, stay on the line too, because my producer Karen is going to come on and give you a copy of the book. And let's go to Kirk in Southeast Florida. Kirk, you're live on the air. Go right ahead.
Ed, first of all, I owe you an apology. When I first started listening to you, I was judgmental about you because you sounded very professorial when you spoke. And I thought, well, this guy, and he has to always start out telling me about he's this, and this with Viola and so forth. But the more I listen to you, the more I realize that's just who you are. And first of all, I have no right to be judgmental about anything. And I've come to love your program. I find it because you're on right after Dr. Rydelnik. And
Dr. Rydelnik, he's amazing.
You know who's better than Dr. Rydelnik?
Who?
Eva Rydelnik.
That's fair. That's exactly right. That's right. All right, Kirk. Well, let's get right to your call, because we want to keep it moving. Go right ahead. What's your comment?
All right. I have two comments. One is that you all talked about some of the negative people young men are following. I think you need to talk briefly about the impact Charlie Kirk made in young men of that age group. I guess that's the Gen Zs over the 13 years of his ministry. And the other thing is that the impact that and I'm part of a baby boomer, so in the last 50 years of men in America, Mama went to church, Grandma went to church, Dad didn't go to church, and Grandpa didn't go to church. So men kind of got like, well, that's a woman thing. And I'm so excited about the return of young men into church. And yes, we need mentoring, we need fellowship, we need people to walk alongside of them. So I'm excited to hear about what your guest has to say about those two factors.
Good. But tell me first, Kirk, what do you think about Charlie? Your name's Kirk too. What do you think about Charlie Kirk's influence on young men?
I think it is a God thing. I think it's astronomical when you see the numbers of young men that have, and the number of clubs that have been started not only in colleges but in high schools, and the number of men that show up at his rallies and so forth. And there just seems to be an astronomically large proportion of men versus women, even though they're both there.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks for your call, Kirk. Remember, stay on the line so we can, my producer, Karen, will come on and give you a copy of The Man You're Meant to Be. And as you tune into the show in the future, just tune in about 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds after it begins, and you won't hear me introduce myself, but they make me introduce myself and say what I do. But anyway, that's another story for another day. I do think, for me, one of the things we found this Sunday at church, I guess, people listen to podcasts, but this So the Sunday after we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we saw a lot of young men showing up that had been influenced by Charlie Kirk, and what they spoke of, he what they said was that he challenged us to live differently and to put aside the video games and to get work and get married and have kids. And so I've seen some of that and we've seen some of that in church as well. So let's talk some in general. Again, John, young men are looking for role models. So how do we think about? And I think this is why when Kirk called a minute ago, he kind of put it in the same category of he said mentioned Rogan and what about Kirk? But I think they kind of speak to the same yearning. Is young men need role models, and we live in a world where there's not a lot of them. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, and Kirk, thank you for your question and even just naming what should be named. I think it's really helpful in many ways. And Ed, when we were looking at this or talking about this, there's a few things at play when you look at Charlie Kirk, I believe. And I will say young men, the Gen Zers, but then there's also, I would say, the 45 and below type men who I think Charlie Kirk was passionate about a biblical worldview. And again, it's going back to those worldview questions that I think Charlie would take them on in a setting that was uncomfortable. And not only that, but Charlie would he wasn't just, answering it and throwing them away like, oh, this worldview, this person who's asking this question is terrible. No, there was a level of civility that he modeled that I think a lot of people are attracted to. And I think for young men, they saw that he would be willing to have the type of faith to walk into the campuses he did, be asked the questions from people who were so vehemently against his faith, and yet stand there and say, here's where I'm at. And I think that is the contagious level of what younger generations are looking at just in general, is there's such passion for why do we believe what we believe. And I think Charlie went on campuses and modeled that in a way that many men were looking at him. And, just you touched on this last week, Ed. I mean, even on the day that he was murdered, assassinated, we had our men's groups. We have them throughout the week, but that Wednesday night, and men they came in and were shaken to the core. And there's some of them who I know they were followers of Charlie Kirk, and every bit of this, was almost felt like a personal attack. And then there's other men who did not know of Charlie as well, and yet they were shaken too. And what was interesting in this was, it's kind of this idea that when you see someone who's so passionate proclaiming a biblical truth, and yet this is what happens, I think there was that moment of like, is this really where we're at as a culture? Is this what civility has come to, or the lack of civility? And where's the common good? Where is that the understanding that I think even as parents, my kids are younger, but some of these men who are older, there was a few guys who did not even know of Charlie that were shaken by it because they are thinking, my son or daughter is going off to college and I want them to boldly proclaim their faith and be a witness for him. But this terrifies me. Is this what it's really going to be like? And obviously this was an extremist case, but the level of feeling attacked for your faith, is this what we've become? And I think that level of sadness and fear is on top of, the men who absolutely, were passionate with Charlie about everything he was. But there's even a greater sense, I think, that's kind of why it's hit people even further.
Well, I think for us, I think a lot of people underestimated his influence, and I recognize that there are people of strong opinions in different directions, different sides on this issue. But at the end of the day, one of the things you have to acknowledge is that showing up at church this weekend again will be young men who are unsure about their future, unsure about the place that they have for their own lives, what manhood is, and it's a great opportunity for us to point them to Jesus. We're going to continue our conversation in just a moment with John Simons. The book is The Man You're Meant to Be. Okay, we're back. Ed Stetzer live. We've just got a few minutes, so we're going to get right to the calls. We got time for a couple of calls, so you can call in still, 877-548-3675. We're talking about, well, manhood. We're talking about a new book called The Man You're Meant to Be. The full subtitle of that's The Man You're Meant to Be. And then it's a call of self-examination for every believer, hypocrite, and outsider. And then he kind of explains what he means by that in the book as well. Our guest is John Simons. And let's go to the phones. And let's go first to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you're live on the air. Jump right in.
Hi there.
Elizabeth, are you there? Okay, please go right ahead, Elizabeth.
Thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Please go right ahead now.
Okay. We love our church. We love our pastors and the elder body. It is a good church. It is scripturally sound. My husband started a men's ministry where he cooks for the men of the church once a month on a Saturday morning. My complaint is that the pastors and the elders, I don't feel, support him. I would think that they could come one time taking turns. I hate to criticize them, but I don't feel that my husband is being supported. And I'd like to talk to the pastors about that, although I know that they are very busy.
Yeah, okay. So, of course, Elizabeth, as you know, it can be a challenge because, church size, as your church gets larger, there might be an associate pastor or something that you need to talk to, but he doesn't feel supported. He starts the men's ministry, doesn't feel supported. What advice would you give, John, for a church that, in this case, Elizabeth's concerned that the church isn't supporting the men's ministry? What's a healthy, what would that look like that's healthy that might help Elizabeth think about this situation? By the way, Elizabeth, stay on the line. We're going to give you a copy of The Man You're Meant to Be.
Yeah, Elizabeth, and know your husband. One, he's doing a great thing by pouring into these men in this way. I think one of the things to think through is how do you approach the pastor to just say, one, we want to invite you just to remind you, but secondly, to let him know of the good work that's being done there. And here's what I find when I coach other pastors and those who are starting men's ministries is sometimes it's better to go to a groups model right away than just so many churches have small groups. So how do you fit into their system and to do a men's group? But then secondly, it's when you cast the vision of men's ministry, this is the thing. So some churches may find that, well, if we build a huge men's ministry, will it become like a church within a church? And that's every pastor's fear for things, and to communicate, we want to work within the discipleship model that we have as a church, but then even to remind them of the reason why I think now more than ever we should be pouring into our men is that because it will come full circle. A church that is doing men's discipleship well is eventually going to feel that effects throughout all the church. And I mean that in terms of you will have healthier homes, you'll have a healthier church where men want to serve. Like at our church, it was interesting this year for even high school ministries going to their beach week. They had more men than ever say, I'll be a camp or a cabin leader. And that is the type of full effect I think pastors would like to hear of. What's this going to mean if I really invest all this into men's ministry? So that's hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about in the book, where in Scripture, in the Scriptures, do you anchor a discussion about manhood? Where does that draw from? Because I get concerned, to be honest.
Yeah.
That, again, I watched it blow up 2 churches. It was more kind of focused on the culture than the Scripture. So unpack that for us.
Yeah, and so that's where you will find many men's ministries. Even ours says we'll run to Proverbs and do something like iron sharpens iron and act like men. When Paul says that, I'm rooting this far deeper in a level of general formation. That again, it's Romans 8:28 through 29. It's that we are supposed to be patterned after the likeness of Jesus. It's Galatians 5 that a good man we ought to see the fruit of the Spirit in him. Is he a loving man? Is he joyful, peaceful, patient, kind? Is he filled with goodness? Is his presence filled with gentleness and faithfulness? I actually, when I think we get too bogged down in certain verses that I think, Ed, you and I probably know them of, at every men's conference, they're going to say this verse. I want to pull that back and affirm, yes, I affirm all the roles that we have biblically cemented for men. But I think there's that prior formation that needs to occur. It's going back to James 3, the way from below, or wisdom from below, wisdom from above, and saying, where is God taking root in our heart, that his wisdom, our intimacy with him, is what is actually producing this fruit in our lives. And so that's, in some ways, I would say, Ed, where we find biblical manhood is right in line with what we would say just good discipleship is.
I think if some of the churches I've seen blow up had that attitude, what a difference it would make. And 30 seconds, just speak to us a word of exhortation about how to raise up godly men in our lives, in our homes, in our churches.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ed, I would just encourage each man to walk with deep conviction and faith to represent Jesus boldly. And all of us need for the Lord to do a good work in us. And that's what this work is about, no matter the stage of life you're in.
The book is The Man You Were Meant to Be. Our guest, John Simons. By the way, this book's just been out about a week, so you can order it right now wherever you order your books. Hey, let me thank John Simons, our guest, for joining me today. Thanks also to our team. I already mentioned my producer, Karen Hendren. My associate producer is Lisa Gempe, engineer Merle St. James, and Cheyenne is on the phones. To hear today's program again, you'll find it over at edstetzerlive.com. It's always over there. And remember, Ed Stetzer Live is a production of Moody Radio, which is a ministry of Moody Bible Institute. Follow us on the socials, all at Ed Stetzer Live. We'll look forward to talking to you next Saturday, or also download us by podcast at the website